Okay, so you know how everyone always pictures proposals, right? Like it's this big romantic setup, candles, maybe a violin playing in the background, the whole nine yards,
Yeah, totally classic storybook stuff.
right? But what about when things don't exactly, go according to that plan?
Hmm.
What about the couples who are rewriting the whole proposal timeline? That's what we're diving into today.
Ooh, interesting. Sounds juicy.
Or it is, trust me. So this all started because you sent in this outline for a podcast called The Waiting Game: Love, Patience, and Proposals.
Intriguing title.
Right. And it totally grabbed my attention. I mean, we're talking about couples waiting years, sometimes even a decade for a proposal.
Wow, a decade. That's like longer than some marriages.
Exactly. It's not just a long engagement. It's like, are we even playing by the same rules of relationships anymore? So have you ever come across a topic like this before?
Honestly, never. It's wild. Like, we're so used to proposals being this big dramatic thing, the climax of the story.
Yeah, the grand gesture.
Exactly. But this outline, this is like flipping the script and asking, what about all the time leading up to that moment?
Yes, it's about the journey, not just the destination.
Right. And not just like a quick trip. We're talking years of emotional baggage, unspoken expectations, maybe even some power imbalances brewing under the surface.
Ooh, getting heavy. And that's what I love about this outline. It doesn't shy away from those messy, complicated parts. It really digs into the nitty-gritty of those years spent waiting.
Speaking of messy and complicated, you said there are real couples involved in this.
Oh, yeah. They're bringing in actual couples who've gone through this, who've navigated these long waiting periods. It's going to be super insightful.
Oh, I bet. Hearing those personal experiences, the ups, the downs, the whole roller coaster of emotions, that's going to be powerful.
Absolutely. It's one thing to talk about societal expectations in theory, but to hear how those expectations actually play out in people's lives, that's next level stuff.
For sure. Like, I can already imagine those conversations getting really real, really raw.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's like we're so conditioned by movies, social media, even just like, family traditions, to think there's this right timeline for relationships.
Totally. Get engaged by this age, married by that age. It's like a checklist.
Exactly. And this outline, right off the bat, it tackles those societal norms head on. It's like, hold up, who decided these timelines in the first place?
Right. And are they even working for us anymore, or are they just creating unnecessary pressure and anxiety?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Because that pressure can be intense. Imagine waiting, wondering if your partner's on the same page,
Yeah.
constantly questioning your worth in the relationship.
Oh, absolutely. It can really mess with your head, even if everything else in the relationship is great. Makes you wonder, is this whole waiting over a decade thing becoming more common, or has it always been there, just, hidden beneath the surface of what we consider normal?
Right. Like, is this some new relationship trend, or have people just been quietly suffering in silence for generations? The world may never know.
That's the million-dollar question. And there are so many factors to consider. Is it changing economic realities, evolving gender roles? I mean, even look at the growing trend of women proposing. That wasn't even a mainstream conversation a generation ago.
So true. Times are definitely changing. And that makes this whole exploration even more fascinating. It's like we're trying to understand this evolving landscape of love and commitment, and proposals are right at the heart of it.
They are, aren't they? And things get even juicier when we dig into the reasons behind these proposal delays.
Mm.
Episode 3 dives right into that. And it's some seriously thought-provoking stuff. We're talking finances, readiness for marriage, fear of commitment, all the usual suspects.
Right. Those seem like pretty straightforward explanations on the surface, wouldn't you say?
They do, but something tells me this podcast is going to dig a little deeper.
Oh, I'm sure of it. Because what if those surface level reasons are actually masking something much bigger, much more complicated?
Like what? Give me a for instance.
Yeah. Well, let's say you've been with someone for a decade and still haven't gotten engaged. Do you think those initial concerns, finances, readiness, whatever, are still the main roadblock?
I see what you mean. Maybe not.
Right. After that long, there's a good chance there are some deeper issues at play, some bigger conversations that need to happen.
It's like sweeping all the hard stuff under the rug, pretending it's not there.
Right, but eventually that rub's going to be so lumpy and bumpy, you're going to trip over it.
Exactly. And after a decade, well, let's just say those unspoken expectations can turn into some serious relationship hazards.
Oh, absolutely. And this is where the waiting game really starts to get interesting, because it doesn't shy away from the emotional roller coaster that comes with this waiting game.
No, it doesn't.
Imagine the uncertainty, the frustration, the self-doubt. You're stuck in this limbo, wondering if you even value the relationship more than your partner does.
Oof, that cuts deep.
It does, doesn't it?
It's that feeling of, like, am I being unreasonable for wanting more? For
Yeah.
wanting that commitment?
Totally. Like, am I being needy? Am I being clingy? Or am I just being taken for granted?
It's no wonder they dedicated a whole episode to the emotional toll of waiting.
Right. It's heavy stuff.
Yeah, definitely not a walk in the park. But here's the thing. This show doesn't just focus on the negative, the waiting, the wondering. It also explores what happens when, after all that time, the proposal actually does come.
Oh, so it does have a happy ending.
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Episode 8, when the proposal finally comes, that's where things get really interesting.
Okay, so what's the verdict? Does the long wait make the proposal sweeter?
That's what they're trying to figure out. Did it make the bond stronger, like they could overcome anything?
Or is there this lingering doubt, like, were they right to wait?
Exactly. It's like, can you really just go back to happily ever after all that? Or has the relationship fundamentally changed?
Wow, it's like the ultimate test of a relationship, isn't it?
It really is. And what stood out to me is that even when the proposal does happen, they don't present it as this fairy tale ending.
Yeah.
They keep it real.
Oh, I like that. So it's not all rainbows and butterflies after the ring appears.
Definitely not. They dig into how that long wait might have reshaped the relationship, for better or for worse.
That's super insightful because I think a lot of people assume that the proposal is the finish line.
Right. Like once you get that ring, everything magically falls into place.
Exactly. But that's not always the reality, is it?
Not always, no. And I think that's why this whole podcast idea is resonating with so many people. It's not just about those who've waited a long time for a proposal.
Right. It's tapping into something deeper, something more universal.
Exactly. About those universal anxieties we all face in relationships, that fear of uncertainty, that longing for commitment.
It's like that feeling of, are we on the same page?
Oh,
But amplified, you know?
yes. It's like taking that feeling and putting it under a microscope. And I can only imagine the conversations they're going to have with those couples, like really unpacking those anxieties and vulnerabilities.
And that's what makes it so relatable. Because who hasn't felt that way at some point in a relationship?
Exactly. Whether you're waiting for a proposal, a promotion, or even just that text back, that feeling of limbo.
It's universal.
It is. And that's what makes this whole deep dive so fascinating. But here's the thing. It doesn't just leave you hanging in that uncertainty.
Oh, good. So there's hope.
There is. It actually empowers you to take action. It encourages you to have those difficult conversations, to ask for what you need, even if it feels scary or goes against the grain.
That's so important, right?
Yeah.
To feel empowered to speak up for what you want in a relationship.
It is. It really is. Because so often we stay silent, you know.
We do, out of fear of rocking the boat, of coming across as too demanding.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But this show, it's like it gives you permission to say, hey, my needs matter too.
Yes. And it highlights how crucial that communication is, especially when you've been holding back for years. But you know what else really struck me as we've been discussing this?
What's that?
It's like there's so much pressure, especially on women, to hit certain relationship milestones. Oh, tell me about it. It's like society's got this whole timeline mapped out for us.
Right. And if you're not hitting those marks, ring by 30, marry by 35, whatever it is.
You're suddenly behind, like it's some kind of race.
Exactly. And then that doubt creeps in. What's wrong with me? Why hasn't it happened yet? It can really mess with your head.
Oh, absolutely. It's like those expectations become self-fulfilling prophecies, you know.
They really do. It's like you start to believe that there's something wrong with you if you haven't found the one or gotten that ring by a certain age.
Right. And then you start settling for less than you deserve or pressuring your partner when they might not be ready.
Exactly. It's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
But this podcast, this waiting game, it feels different.
It does, doesn't it? It's
Mhm.
refreshing. It's like they're saying, hey, it's okay to do things differently.
Yes. It's like they're throwing those old, outdated rule books out the window. It's about writing your own love story on your own terms.
And that's a powerful message. Because it's not just about proposals, it's about taking control of your own narrative.
Exactly. And recognizing that there's no one right way to have a relationship. So as we're wrapping up this deep dive, what's the biggest thing you're taking away from this conversation?
You know, I think what resonates most with me is that idea of self-discovery. Like, yes, this podcast is about proposals and waiting, but it's also about something much bigger than that.
What do you mean?
It's about understanding yourself, your needs, your boundaries. It's about having the courage to ask for what you want and the strength to walk away if your needs aren't being met.
It's about knowing your worth.
Right.
and not settling for anything less.
Exactly. And that's a message everyone needs to hear, whether they're single, dating, engaged, or married.
I totally agree. And, it makes you think about all those unspoken anxieties people have, not just about proposals, but about commitment in general.
It's true. And this podcast, by bringing those anxieties to light, by giving them a voice, it's starting a really important conversation.
It is a conversation about expectations, about communication, about what it really means to be in a committed relationship.
And that's something I'm really excited to see explored further.
Me too. Yeah. Well, as much as I'm enjoying this conversation, we are actually out of time for today.
Already, it feels like we just got started.
I know, right? But the good news is this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to unpack when it comes to the waiting game. And for our listeners, if this conversation has piqued your interest, I highly recommend checking out the podcast when it launches. You might be surprised by what you discover about yourselves and about the evolving landscape of relationships.
I second that. It's definitely a must listen.
It is. And until then, keep those conversations going. Share your thoughts, your experiences, your waiting game stories with us on social media. We're always here to listen, learn, and grow together.